I can't flesh it out, but I can confirm the intention of this paper, which was that some issues were raised, and for the information of the council, and then the council was recommended that the council obtain its own advice, and that's what we're doing here today. So the paper from HBRC simply indicates some issues, but concludes that the council should take its advice. Paper from HBRC does not make any particular recommendation.
So can I, Mr. Chair, can I just, and Mr. Webster touched on this earlier, is it actually a practical option to look at having alternates during that process?
I'm saying that it's possible. I'd need to check the Constitution, but it's certainly possible for alternates to be appointed for specific decision making around the HBRC table.
And would that be something that you would recommend as a legal advisor?
No, my advice is do nothing is a viable option.
So in relation to perception of conflict of interest, which is a different thing to actual conflict of interest, how do you see it's best for council to avoid those perceptions of conflict?
That's a political issue. I really can't respond to that. I'm with Councillor Rose on that one.
So you're not giving advice on perceptions?
What I'm saying is there's a whole lot of management techniques. 3 of them have been put up in that issues paper. I've suggested another one, which is to manage the presence at meetings, the deliberation and the voting at meetings as perhaps a 4th mechanism. Which mechanism you choose, and I suppose the 5th one is do nothing, is entirely a political choice.
Through you, Mr. Chair, as far as Councillor Dick mentioned the various hats, and you can vote. You could vote one way on the HBRC, and you could vote another way at council. But how would the public know that an individual had changed the vote on those 2 different things, because the HBRC meetings are not held in the public, and that information is not made available to the public? So how would anybody actually know that information?
I'm really not qualified
I could answer
to
that.
answer
I mean, the recommendation comes from HBRC. Councillors, any director may or may not have voted in favour of it. Council then has to make its own determination of that final deliberation, and it may involve some extra information. It may involve a whole lot of things. The questions may be different in the recommendation. So that's pretty straightforward, really.
So, I mean, we're actually talking about something where we're going to have no knowledge of whether it's happened or not, isn't that right?
Can I say there's a choice for each councillor to say that's for the councillor directors. I voted this particular way around that boardroom table, but I choose to vote in a different way around the council table for the following reasons. And if that's a matter of public record, then certainly the public will get to know about that. That is an option. It's a management option. I'm saying it's a viable option.
Under the Constitution, are those councillor directors allowed to divulge how they voted around the HBRC table?
They might seek permission of the HBRC board first to do so, but I shouldn't think that there's any restrictions.
I think if we get to the recommendations here, unless there's any other particular questions, and the recommendation is on page 5, which is quite simply whether or not action needs to be taken to reduce the perception of conflict of interest and or predetermination by councillor directors on the board of HBRC Limited in relation to HBRC decisions on the Ruatana for water storage projects. Pretty specific recommendation. Nod, if you've got any questions particularly around that, I think
can I ask you,
the next step.
Mr. Chairman, so if I can just ask you, if we support recommendation 2, does that mean that staff will then bring us back a more fulsome paper around all?
Well, no, we'll need a...
What will be the progression
We need a particular recommendation, is that what you're
Well,
saying?
I think this, as I said, there's a couple of trigger points, and this is one of them. If you determine that no action needs to be taken, that will be it. If you determine that there is, we would definitely want some guidance, I think, from you on which of the now 4 options we should pursue further, and any other options that you might wish to put forward today.
Mr. Chair, number 2 recommendation, haven't we dealt with that today? Why would we need to get any more advice on top of what we've already had today?
Because if you decide that you do want to take further action around the perceived conflict of interest or predetermination, there are a number of options about how you could deal with that, and I think that there needs to be, well, my advice to you is that we need to closely consider the ramifications of some of those.
Including further examination of the Constitution is just one example. Take us to a recommendation. Oh, another question.
Yes, one of the options is the formation on a subsidiary company at an earlier stage than setting up the eventual, should the project go ahead, the eventual operating company that would run it. Could we actually, if you were seeking advice, can we, further advice, if the decision was to seek more detail in that, could we get some costings and the impact of setting up a subsidiary prior to, should the project proceed, setting up an operating company? That's it, setting up that intermediary company that would sit under the holding company.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move.
Question there. You wish that to be included if we do go further?
If that was a viable, I don't think you can make a decision on doing that without having that option costed.
That's why I moved. There's 4 or 5, 10, whatever number there is. Let's. Webster says it's not a reality.
Just, have you got a motion there? Can you put it into words?
A further report on options and issues to be provided to reduce the perception of conflict of interest, etc., etc., etc. The rest of the words that are in there. Chairman, the fact we're having this discussion indicates there is a problem. Whether it's a proper problem or it's a big problem, a small problem, there is an issue that has to be addressed, and it can't be left on the table or otherwise. I am very conscious, way back when I first started here, which when it was only 2 months ago, but way back, that what I call the Councillor Christine Scott dictum was reminded me of why the councillors were put on there, which was when the debate about the holding company occurred, apart from the Chamber of Commerce and a few others who just said, get on with it, you should do this anyhow for good commercial reasons, there was a debate in the wider sense that councillors should be there in the word control, which is, I call the Councillor Scott dictum. Well, you've mentioned it several times and I agree with you. And there was certainly that issue raised. And that's where it comes to the point of the Auditor General, who said about the holding company as opposed to operating companies. And I understand Councillor Dick's point that at what point does an operating company become not a holding company and vice versa? Sorry, Councillor Dick, I may have got it wrong, but the point, as you said, there's a continuum there which isn't really, we haven't reached. But this is not, in my opinion, HBRC is not operating as a holding company at the moment, and it can't. Because it is tangled invariably and inevitably in the dam process and maybe others coming through. I just distinguish the way the council handled the port company when you didn't have a holding company. The port company had a big development. I think it was Wharf 5. I may get the wharf wrong, but it was a huge one. The port came directly here. You don't have councillors on the port company. They came directly here with their proposal. You trusted the port company. You didn't need councillor directors on the port company. And quite rightly so, and you've done very, and the port company is a very good example. Council then did its own independent report, and then the project went ahead as the shareholders' approval. And that was a good example of where you can actually get round this thing by not having councillor directors at all, if that was necessary. Holding company is a different animal from an operating company to that extent, and therefore, up to a point, I agree with a councillor director or a couple. as a principle, I don't agree with council directors because I believe councillors are appointed for a different reason. And with the greatest respect to all of us around the table, we are not here because we're commercial gurus of holding companies per se. The next complication comes in this debate, and invariably, is when councillor directors should be paid. My opinion is they should be. If you have a director there, they are there for those reasons. They have fiduciary and fiduciary responsibilities to a company, and therefore you should pay them. I know that's not on the table now, but it will become increasingly complicated as time goes on because of that, if not earlier. And therefore, for the abundance of caution, it's always been my view, and I'm just offering this as a suggestion of one of the options to look at, along with all the others that I'm sure will be mentioned shortly, that councillors are actually, if councillor directors are to exist, they simply retire at the debate at the council. We've talked about alternate directors at the HBRC. I'm talking about councillors being here but retiring in the debate. Now, in Dunedin and in Wellington, and I believe in New Plymouth, and there'll be probably one other council, I'm just trying to remember, I think it was Timaru, that's exactly how they did it. They had councillors there, but they retired and did not take part in the vote, which is why I asked the question about if we were removing directors, what would happen. I'm also conscious of the role of directors. And the role of directors, to me, is to give their heart and soul to the company. Full stop. And therefore, I don't believe, unlike, I was going to say Councillor Webster, sorry, Mr. Webster, I don't believe you can serve two masters in your own head. I respect people that say they can do it, and I don't argue that that's their view, but I personally don't think it's absolutely possible. And after sitting on a number of boards, in fact, I saw a long list of them the other day, the boards I've been on in various times, I've always found that difficult to understand how you can operate on both sides. Therefore, I think we need to sort this out. We need to do it quickly, we need to do it comprehensively, and we need to tidy it up. And if we get back 4 or 5 different options, let's have a look at them, let's vote, and let's publicly and clearly fix this for the future benefit of HBRC. This is a distraction, an important one, I agree, but an absolute distraction from what the good work has been happening in Ruataniwha and the good work that could be happening in the Whakatū Hub, because that'll be the next distraction, or elsewhere, which is why the holding company was set up. And I think it's a superb and proper thing. But I think we're just being tangled into these silly little things. However important it is nonetheless a silly little thing. Let's move it out.
Thank you. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I basically agree with the comments made by Councillor Douglas. I think we need to deal with this. I think there is a perception out there that we have a problem. How real it is, I suppose it depends on the person holding the perception. I have great difficulty in accepting that a person can vote one way at a holding company or an operational company or something in between, and then have a complete reversal when it comes to the board table of this council. They in the head might think that they're doing that. I doubt very much whether the public, who are our masters, would actually see it or agree with it. I think as I see it at the moment, I'm looking forward to getting the options, perhaps at the council meeting next month, where we can probe a little deeper with them. I think the problem perhaps lays in the number of councillors that we have. When the holding company was mooted, and we had a series of discussions with the public or public meetings about the holding company, I thought the general opinion out there was that probably we would be better to have a commercial board rather than have council appointees on the board. The public seemed to think that probably we needed a council influence, and possibly one councillor would be sufficient. Somehow it grew from 1 to 3, and I think hence that may be the genesis of some of the problems we have. So in that aspect, I see things perhaps a little differently than my colleague Councillor Dick does. But overall, I don't think there is disagreement around the table that there is a deception out there that this needs to be looked at, needs to be worked through. And I think at this stage that's really all we're saying. And so I'm supportive of the recommendation, Mr. Chairman, that staff bring back to us next month, perhaps fully fleshed out, the 4 or 5 proposals that we can work through.
Others